Just moments before Pyongyang launched its latest ballistic missile, world powers were meeting right here at the UN Security Council. China's foreign minister had called for restraint even as the US pushed for tougher sanctions and threatened military force.
Given the grave situation on the peninsula, China strongly urges all parties to remain calm and exercise restraint and avoid provocative rhetorics or actions that would lead to miscalculation. Second, we must stay committed to the path of dialogue and negotiation. The use of force does not solve differences and will only lead to bigger disasters.
China's urging for dialogue was in response to U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's calls to further isolate the DPRK by imposing new sanctions that would further cripple Pyongyang diplomatically and financially, with military force as an option.
The threat of a North Korean nuclear attack on Seoul or Tokyo is real, and it is likely only a matter of time before North Korea develops the capability to strike the U.S. mainland. Diplomatic and financial levers of power will be backed up by a willingness to counteract North Korean aggression with military action, if necessary.
Since 2006, the Security Council has adopted 6 resolutions demanding the DPRK stop its nuclear and missile activities. But those activities have accelerated. In the span of a year, the DPRK has carried out 2 nuclear tests and in 2017 alone has already test-fired more than half a dozen ballistic missiles. The U.S., which convened the high-level meeting, had called out Security Council members for not fully implementing existing sanctions, taking careful aim at China.
Had this body fully enforced and stood behind resolutions it had enacted in the past, vigorously enforcing sanctions with full compliance, perhaps we would not have found ourselves confronted with the high level of tension that we're faced today. We must all do our share. But China, accounting for 90% of North Korean trade, China alone has economic leverage over Pyongyang that is unique, and its role is therefore particularly important.
But China said all parties should play a part.
I also want to stress here that the state of affairs of the peninsula issue is not caused by any single party, nor is it realistic to ask any party alone to take up all the responsibilities for resolving the issue. As President Xi Jinping said, only with all relevant parties shouldering their due responsibilities and meeting each other halfway will there be an early solution to the nuclear issue on the peninsula.
The question now, Mike, is whether negotiation and compromise remain on the table. Now, just before news broke of the ballistic missile test by Pyongyang, the ambassador from the DPRK to the United Nations, or deputy ambassador rather, had called U.S. efforts to push for Pyongyang's denuclearization through military threats and sanctions as, and I quote, a wild dream. He also reiterated Pyongyang's stand not to engage in any talk about nuclear abandonment. Now, while this is being perceived as a show of disregard by Pyongyang for international efforts at diplomacy, it also raises the question of whether China has as much leverage over Pyongyang as the U.S. believes it does.
Li-Ling, what is likely to change, or do you expect any type of change in terms of an international response to this issue?
Well, given the latest development, it's likely, conceivable, that we could see a U.S. digging its heels deeper into the push for new and tougher sanctions, for tightening the noose around Pyongyang diplomatically and financially, and also to follow through on its threat to use military force. Now, it certainly makes the case for negotiation much harder to make. China has long maintained that dialogue and diplomacy is the only solution forward. But if Pyongyang isn't interested in diplomacy and dialogue, then what other options are there?